Thanks,
Well,
all. Go.
it is the top of the hour, so we're going to get started. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Global Math Department. My name is Lee Natero, and I'll be your host tonight. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Chase Orton about deliberate practice, how math teachers can close the professional development gap. So I know some of you have already been telling us where you are right now, but if you could also introduce us to us, telling us what you teach and where you teach and what your Twitter handle is if you have one. So if you could introduce yourself in the chat. I know some people have already shared their location, but if you could share your teaching situation as well, that would be great.
Thanks for sharing that, Cheryl. Hi, Melissa. Hi, Amy.
So before I introduce our speaker, let me explain how these meetings work. These meetings are recorded and are available within 24 hours after the meeting ends. To view the recording, you would use the same URL you used to get here tonight. The Global Math Community prides itself on being friendly and supportive. The chat room is available for topical or general conversation throughout the meeting. I'll catch your questions for the presenter, so don't worry that the presenter won't notice your questions in the chatter. Tonight, our speaker is Chase Orton. Chase is a math teacher, coach, facilitator, speaker, and consultant with over 20 years of experience working with students and teachers in classrooms. He's passionate about building productive, inspiring, engaging math classrooms and has conducted over 100 lesson studies with K-12 math teachers and continues to work to empower teachers in districts throughout California. Chase is the lead author of Math Links, a comprehensive math curriculum for middle school students. In addition to speaking and sharing his work at conferences nationally, he writes about his ideas and invites your collaboration at www.chaseorton.com. So I will now turn the presentation over to Chase.
Great. Good evening, good morning, good day to you, wherever you are. Thank you for taking the time to geek out with me. I'm excited to talk to you about deliberate practice and how that can help us as math teachers to close the professional development gap. First off, I hope you and yours are healthy and well these days. I mean that not just physically, but emotionally, mentally too. I don't know about you, but I've been missing and craving some human connection. And I'm so grateful, really, truly grateful to be here with you tonight. And second, I know COVID-19 is on a lot of our minds, not only because it impacts our personal lives, but also is impacting our professional lives so much. And so tonight, I'm gonna ask us to kind of take a break from COVID. And I know many of us are approaching the limits of our bandwidth. And so I invite us to take a big, deep collective breath and remind ourselves that this pandemic isn't forever and that our schools are going to reopen. And when they do, we're going to face not just the same challenges that we were facing in March when we were still in our classrooms, but also a new set of challenges too as we emerge from this once in a generation kind of event. And life is going to be different for a while, especially for our students, and their needs are going to change. And our needs as math teachers are going to change. And I want us to think about how we navigate those changes once in-person schooling gets back underway in our work here tonight. If you're currently doing distance learning as a teacher, I'm not offering any magic bullets tonight. I do think that what we explore can be helpful in all of our professional settings, including the one that we're currently in. And so I'm hoping that everybody here finds some value. But I really want us to be thinking about how we can prepare ourselves for work life once we emerge from this pandemic. I'm a big fan of the Freakonomics podcast. I've got some ideas tonight. I assure you the best idea I have is that this podcast is worth listening to. And Stephen Dubner has a great interview question. In episode 379, he asks, titled, How to Change Your Mind. He begins an interview by asking this following prompt, which is similar to the one that we just had on the screen. And so I want us to kind of change it so we can focus on the teaching and learning of mathematics. And so if you haven't already, take a moment and think about this prompt. Thank you for those that had some vulnerability, sharing your comments in there. Feel free to add to it. And I just kind of will come back to this question a little bit later in this webinar. But for now, I just want us to kind of think about what does it take to change our mind. And I hope that we can agree on three things. One, we have to feel the frustration. We have to feel the frustration that what we're doing isn't really working. And we also have to have a willingness to express some vulnerability and admit that we're wrong. And sometimes that takes a lot of courage, right? Like changing minds is often viewed as a sign of weakness these days, not of strength. And it's a really unproductive mindset for any sort of growth and learning. So for us to learn, for us to grow, we have to have some vulnerability and willingness to admit that we're wrong. And lastly, I think the third thing we need to change our mind is some data that's usually given to us through a lived experience, something that shifts our perspective in a way that shifts our own understanding of us, our teaching, our students, or our work. And we had to see it differently. And so this is what I'm hoping to tap into tonight, a little bit of frustration that some of us might be feeling around professional development, and a willingness to be vulnerable and talk about maybe some of the things that we've been wrong about. And I'm hoping that I can shift your perspective and really shift your perspective about what professional development can and should look like for math teachers. And so I want to begin tonight with a confession, because I want to model some vulnerability for you. And my confession is this: math lessons didn't always work for all of my students. Despite my best efforts, I've always struggled to meet the needs of all my students while also moving learning forward for the whole class. And also doing that at the pace of school, right? Like the pace of school never seemed to match the pace of my bell schedule and the pace of the student learning and the pace that I had in this pacing plan around my assessment calendar. And so I always find myself facing this persistent dilemma. How do I get better at moving learning forward for all my students when they're all in different places? And I don't mean just academic places, right? But the social and the emotional places as well. How do I balance the need of the individual with the needs of the group? And I was deeply frustrated by this. Like it bothered me because some of my students were not having positive learning experiences in my classroom. And early in my teaching career, like my first teaching gig, it was very much a sink or swim kind of a thing. And I remember always teaching behind my closed classroom door. And I remember like feeling shame because I didn't have this teaching gift, right? Like after all, if I had the teaching gift, all my students would be successful, right? But they weren't. And I felt a lot of shame around that early in my career and a lot of guilt that I wasn't able to meet all the individual needs of my students. And so something that I realized is that there's no such thing as the teaching gift. And not only that, I'm not alone in my own teaching struggles. Like when I started to open up my classroom door and get into other classrooms, I started to realize that we were all kind of facing this similar sort of dilemma. And that collectively, like we're asking, like, how do we get better at moving learning forward when all of our students are in different places? And I think that this is a dilemma that teachers will always face, no matter wherever we go in whatever context. And I think it's particularly true in mathematics, where gaps in understanding can be viewed as such a debilitating thing for our instruction and an obstacle getting in the way of our teaching. So here's what I need to ask an irreverent question, and I'm borrowing some language from Steve Langwand here. And to say it's irreverent is to say that I need to call out an elephant in the room, and I don't want to come across as being rude or gauche. And let me be clear, when I ask this, I'm not placing any blame on anybody when I ask this question. But with all that we know about effective mathematics teaching practices, why is math class still not working for some students? I know it's a complicated answer. I'm not playing the blame game here. I'm not suggesting it's your fault or my fault or your student's fault. It's not the fault of school or district leaders. And tonight and all of my work, I always want to sidestep the blame game because it invites the debates that divide us, and it's not a safe place to change our minds. Instead, I want to focus on what we have in common as teachers of mathematics. And I think this common dilemma I just mentioned is one of those. But I think something else that we have in common is something called the PD gap. And again, Steve outlined this in a great webinar. You can go check it out. It's on the Global Math Department website, and it's from last November. And Steve talked about that professional development is underperforming. It's neither professional nor does it develop, and it doesn't lead to any change in teacher instruction. And Steve's not the only one to really call this out. the teaching gap came out in 1999 and talked explicitly about how our current culture of teaching, of teacher learning, is an obstacle to our work of improving our teaching practice, especially when it comes to math teaching. Hang on, I've got a little Dotson down here that's a little bit trying to get some attention from me. Forgive me. Here we go. So not only that, we also are facing, improvising here, we need to have a shift in the culture to make any sort of meaningful reform, meaningful shifts in the way teaching happens in the math classroom. It can't happen until we make some shifts in the culture of teacher learning. And so tonight, I want to talk about this PD gap. And I think that the PD that we need to grow our teaching craft does not align with the PD that we're currently being offered. And again, I'm not placing blame here. I'm just calling out something that troubles me, right? Something I'm not trying to solve. It's something that I am trying to solve. And I'm grateful that you're here with me tonight to talk about it. These are some persistent questions that I've been asking over my teaching career. And essentially, what does it take for us to make meaningful changes in our teaching? And in this talk, I want to push back on some of the unproductive beliefs that we have about how we grow as teachers and how we grow the teaching of mathematics. And I must admit, my approach may be a bit American because I'm speaking to the specific struggles that I see what we do here in the States in terms of like helping teachers grow. And so I think that we have some unproductive beliefs that make it really difficult to answer the first two questions, and therefore figure out a way to close the PD gap as well. And so these are my expected outcomes for you tonight. I hope you feel empowered to have a deeper understanding of the causes and the dynamics of the PD gap. And I want to talk about how we can close that, how we can use this thing called deliberate practice. And I also want to invite you to take a journey with me to professional flourishment. And I'll explain a little bit about what that means. But tonight, the themes that I want to focus on are empowerment, invitation, and focusing on the things that we have in common about our teaching practice. We're going to go in this order pretty much through the webinar, but I do want to kind of take a moment and talk about this made-up word, flourishment. Teaching requires a sense of passion for our work, a passion that really needs to be nourished by a feeling that our work matters, that we're adding value to the lives of our students. And when we witness growth in our students, our fulfillment from our work is not just professional. I think it's really deeply personal for a lot of us as teachers. And from that, our energy is renewed with a validated sense of purpose. And then on the flip side, like our teaching struggles, like especially our persistent ones, can leave us feeling a little bit personally defeated and a little insecure perhaps about our teaching abilities. We may even have doubts or days where we begin to question whether or not we're cut out for this job. I know my early career days, I was filled with that, like wondering whether I was ever going to get better at this stuff. And when we don't get nourishment from our work, we lose our wholeness. And I think that we feel pulled apart, worn down, or frustrated. And because our teaching feels so personal to us, we need to have this sense of growing, of progressing, of getting better. We require, like all people, a belief that we can flourish. And I see Robin pointing out Francis Sue's book, Math for Human Flourishing. It's a wonderful book. I encourage you to read it. And yes, I am borrowing that word a little bit from him to talk about this idea of flourishing and how do we do that. So I think a healthy career, a teaching career, requires a constant state of flourishment, the sense of wholeness where we feel nourished by the impact of our work. We feel like our craft can flourish, but achieving and sustaining professional flourishment as a teacher, especially as a teacher of mathematics, can be really, really challenged given some of the realities that we face on our professional landscape. In my work, I talk a lot about four headwinds, four unproductive beliefs that exist on our professional landscape as math teachers. And these are the threats to our sense of flourishment. They're also the causes, I think, of the current PD gap. But I want to give you a silent moment right now and just read these to yourself and think about what those headwinds might mean to you. And I'm curious, like, do any of them make you nod your head in agreement? Are you facing these in your workplace environment? Just give you a moment to kind of process that. Feel free to comment. We got a pretty full webinar. I'll do my best to fold in the comments as they come through. So I think it's really important to understand why these headwinds exist, and how they operate. And I want to unpack them super briefly right now. At least in this country, in the United States, a lot of reform efforts are driven from the top down. And certainly in the United States, a big turning point was 1983, where under Reagan, The Nation at Risk was published. You can find it online. It's a remarkably accessible read, and it's really short. And I do encourage you to read it because it really set a dire tone about education and the need for education reform in the 1980s, and it continues to this day. And a lot of the claims in there have been refuted, but The Nation at Risk really did two things. It set the narrative that schools are failing and that schools need to do better. And it did so, it set an alarm around that, right? Like, this is some of the language that came out with The Nation at Risk, that our educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by this rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. So it really tried to sound the alarm about why schools aren't working and establish a need for education reform and this education reform as a common expression and a norm for all schools. Nation at Risk also started something else. If schools weren't doing better, they needed to be held accountable for doing better. And so starting under Bush with the No Child Left Behind and continuing with Obama with Race to the Top, what ended up happening is that school accountability got tied to funding, which got tied to student test scores, standardized test scores. And you can see that it established this focus that data was the most important thing. And this is a word count from the ESSA Act, the federal legislation about federal legislation for public education. And you can see the word count that 515 times come accountability and assessment. Yeah, and teaching and learning, we get a measly 22. And so this kind of only one data point, but it does suggest that schools doing better means getting students to get right answers on these high-stake tests. For the past several decades, all levels of education in America, from superintendents to principals to teachers to students, are facing an ever-increasing pressure to meet these benchmarks using standardized testing. And in this way, I think that we've gotten to the point that we value data more than we really value the quality of the teaching and the learning experience for our students in the classroom. And again, I'm not placing blame. I think we've been incentivized to really focus on these because we're valuing what's measured. We're valuing these testing scores. And so 1983 might be a long way to go back, but it really ushered in this sort of era of addiction to reform. And back in 99, when the teaching gap came out, we were already aware of this and noting that schools are always in these reform efforts, and we see them today, but we're not always necessarily improving our teaching. John Merrill picks this up. His book, Addicted to Reform, talks about how we get incentivized to juke the data and start manipulating the data and bending, again, worried about data outcomes necessarily than the quality of our teaching. And I recognize that data has a huge place in how we measure that. But our myopic focus here on using standardized testing prevents us from really asking two very essential questions for our work. What does good math teaching look like? And how do we more effectively improve our crafting, right? The goal of improving test scores has left math teachers with no coherent pathway for us to get better, mostly because math scores are never going to tell us how to improve our teaching abilities. And so I think that this kind of leads us into the other two headwinds that I want to talk about briefly. This idea that belief in that teaching is a gift and the fact that we have to work in silos. I think right now, math education has a massive nomenclature problem and it's debilitating our growth. In our work, we use jargon like this that you see on your screen. And these are important ideas with good intentions. They are valuable. I'm not critiquing them at all. And if you ask a room full of math teachers and education leaders what a productive math classroom looks, sounds, and feels like, you'll probably hear some of the same language. But are we really clear on what we're talking about? Do we have a common understanding of what these words even mean, or what good math teaching and productive math classrooms can actually look like? And I think that there's some room to improve there. And I think we need to, because without this clarity, we don't know where we're going, and we risk becoming lost in something that I like to call the fog of better, a place where we have plenty of jargon, right? But we lack the focus and the clarity and the direction necessary to engage in our practice in a way that can help us grow our teaching craft. I also think I invite you to read this quote to yourself, partly because I need to take a little taste of water here. And so I think 3 decades of ed reform efforts in this country, no matter how well-intentioned, have missed the mark because they fail to consider the most important variable in student learning. And that's the quality of our teaching. The educational system, at least in this country, has done a poor job of helping math teachers cultivate their teaching craft over the years. And it's failed to accurately assess and understand and incorporate our professional learning years. And I think year after year, we're finding ourselves in a system that's actively working against our ability to achieve and sustain the sense of professional flourishment. And it's gotten to the point that I'm concerned. I'm concerned that many math teachers feel discouraged. And some may even feel disheartened about their professional future and their sense of efficacy, mostly because we're not left with a coherent pathway for improving our teaching. And again, I'm not placing blame here. This is nobody's fault. Our failures are really are systemic and not necessarily individual. And so coming back to these expected outcomes, I hope you feel like you have a deeper understanding of some of the causes and the dynamics as I see them that are creating this PD gap. And what I want to talk a little bit about now is how to close that gap. And so I want to do that by, hang on a second, juggling. So I think that these are the headwinds that cause us about what we get wrong about PD. But I think they also can help us see us how we need to move forward on a journey. And so I also talk about 4 guiding principles in my work. I think that cultural change must come from the bottom up. We need to measure what we value. Think that teaching is a craft we can improve and seek new vantage. And I'm going to keep these up here. This shows both the headwinds and the guiding principles back to back or side to side. And I invite you just to kind of digest those for yourself. I'm curious what you notice and what you wonder. And take a moment to read those over for yourself. Yeah, I see some notes about comment. I'm talking about the data that's coming from standardized test scores. I work in schools where their number one goal, their number one mandate, smarter balanced test scores need to go up. That's their primary goal, and they focus on attendance, and they focus on some other metrics as well. So I'm not necessarily arguing against the use of data by any means. I'm saying that the top-down reform efforts using standardized test data is not necessarily conducive to our ability to teach in a way that we will find fulfilling. So hopefully you've had a chance to digest those guiding principles. So I believe that if change is going to come, if ed reform is going to happen in math education, it's going to come from us. It's going to come from the teachers of mathematics. And we must seek our own pathway for ourselves. And I'll talk about, I'm offering you my ideas on a pathway on how we can do that later in this webinar. We also need to get clear about what we value and then seek ways to measure that instead of valuing what we measure. And this is borrowing language from John Marrow, who wrote the Addicted to Reform book as well. And I gave a night talk about it a couple years ago. But we need to get clear about what we value most as teachers and finding ways to measure that daily for ourselves and for our students. And I think that we also need to continually realize that teaching is a craft. And like any craft, it can be improved with the right kind of practice. But it can only be improved, right, if we have a willingness to admit that we're wrong, right? And remember Dubner's question, what did it take to change your mind? You may believe that teaching isn't a gift, and many of you may not, and that is great. And I think a lot of teachers may say that it's not, but I don't necessarily think that necessarily helps us talk about how teaching is a craft. And so I think that we need to be able to embody that practice for ourselves. And lastly, I talk a lot about the power of seeking vantage and how that can help us change our minds. And that's about seeing that different perspective that we talk about. And it really, for our work as math teachers, it means leaving the silos of our own classrooms. So these are the things that I think that we must believe and do if we're going to close the PD gap. And this is how I believe that math teachers can best achieve professional flourishment for themselves. It certainly is the backbone of my work, coaching work, is I try to really shift the responsibility for teachers to put them at the center of the process and allow them to direct it. And I feel really, really strongly about these principles and their ability to influence some cultural change. I am currently writing a book, a lot about this work, and about how it's a handbook to help math teachers so they can achieve professional flourishment for themselves. And it's based on these 4 principles, and it's a book written by a math teacher for math teachers. And it's got a wordy title. If you don't like wordy titles, I realize that's long, and if you don't like really wordy titles, you're not going to like the subtitle, because there it is. It's got even more words. But I'm trying to be descriptive as possible here with this handbook. And I hope you see the connection between this title and everything that I'm talking about right here and tonight in this webinar. So the purpose of the Math Teacher's Handbook is to empower us to take more control over our professional learning by developing a coherent pathway to kind of help us guide our own professional growth. And this teacher-centered approach to PD is how we, the math teachers, I think will bring about meaningful change in math education from the bottom up. And it's my vision is where math teachers everywhere are feeling this collective sense of efficacy about their professional future. So if what I've been talking about tonight resonates with you, if you're craving some sense of professional flourishment, then this journey is for you. And if you're experiencing a lot of flourishment already, my hunch is that you know some teachers who might find this journey useful. And maybe you want to consider taking this journey with them. And if you're a coach or a principal, I hope that you use this handbook or view this handbook as a way to help coordinate a book study for your teachers and help them coordinate their own professional learning. Because I think it's a journey that any math teacher is going to find very valuable. And it essentially represents everything that I've learned about answering these questions about how do we create meaningful shifts in the classroom. And so my plan for the rest of the webinar is to give you an idea of what this book project is about and extend an invitation to you to be a part of this journey. I want to offer you some activities that you and your colleagues can use to build a culture of deliberate practice for yourselves and your colleagues. We obviously don't have time to go into everything in the book. At the end of this webinar, I'll post a link so you can get some of these resources now and as they come. And I ask that if you use these activities, that you just give me some feedback on how it went and how I can make them better. And before giving those, I need to take a little bit of a quick detour and talk about, for just a few minutes, this phrase, deliberate practice, because I haven't formally defined it yet for you. So I'm going to throw back to my favorite podcast, Freakonomics, only this time we're going to take a look at episode 244. And I reference these Freakonomics because they're easy places for you to consume more information and further your own learning. There are plenty of spaces that you can figure out, learn about this research on deliberate practice. And so I'm just giving a really quick snapshot here. And the phrase deliberate practice comes from the work of Anders Ericsson. And he was engaged in the science of peak performance and figuring out really what does it take to master a skill. And he realized that experience alone does not lead to improvement. You may be familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers, where he talks about 10,000 hours as being a rough estimate of the time it takes to master something. That's coming from Anders Ericsson's work. But that also doesn't mean that 10,000 hours of just mindlessly engaged in a skill. It's more than that, right? Deliberate practice is a special kind of practicing. And so Again, I'm really streamlining this to do Anders Ericsson's work justice. You should listen, read more a little bit online. But to me, deliberate practice talks about it requires a focus on a well-defined and specific goal. It can't be something vague or overarching. And it requires this idea of open collaboration with and productive feedback from trusted and caring others. And in this case, I'm going to go with coaches and teachers. I didn't have a coach for most of my teaching career. A lot of the teachers I know don't have a coach. And so a lot of times the others that we need are our students and our teachers. And so how do we create those relationships so we can have that open collaboration? And lastly, deliberate practice takes being outside your comfort zone. It is uncomfortable work, right? Partly because it means that you're risking being wrong in front of other people, admitting that you're wrong, and needing to change your mind, and recognizing that you're not necessarily perfect as a teacher. So I streamline deliberate practice down to focus, vantage, and risk. And again, this risk is about the relationships, and the vantage piece is about the power of perspective that we talked about. And when you think about the relationships that are required for open collaboration and productive feedback from people you trust and you feel like they care about your growth, that's a tall task for many teachers, I think, in some schools. The schools are not always safe places for all of us to fail in front of each other as teachers. We don't have a lot of practice with it. And we often don't have the relationships and the professional culture we need for this sort of risk-taking. And so these, in part because these headwinds, right, they prevent us from, we end up talking about student data rather than the quality of our teaching. And we're forced to follow these mandates rather than building sort of sense of community for us. And we're constantly stuck in our own silos. So these headwinds are also working against us. And so what I want you to take away from this little detour into deliberate practice is that deliberate practice is how we will improve our craft of teaching. It also requires trust, vulnerability, and some courageous relationships. So I also want you to know that deliberate practice is embedded in these 4 beacons, these 4 guiding principles. But for these principles to work, and I saw some of you chatting about it, we have to have relationships with the people that we work closely with. And so I think I want to empower the teacher that doesn't yet have those relationships and offer them a pathway that they can have those conversations, hopefully in person at their site, but if need be, like in the global math department world and in the MITBOS and I Teach Math worlds on Twitter, that people can find each other for this kind of collaboration and work, and learn to build these relationships and have some difficult conversations. And so deliberate practice is the backbone of the journey to professional flourishment. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the book now. And there's some humor for me right now. Like as an author, I find myself returning back to my persistent teaching dilemma, right? Like how do I get better at moving the learning forward for all the students, for the group, right? When they're all in individual places. And as an author, I'm facing the similar one, right? Like how do I create a journey for all of us, right? That when our needs may vary so much. And so I want this journey to be as inclusive as possible, and especially for elementary school teachers that may not necessarily identify as the teacher of mathematics. I do want this to be a K-12 experience, a journey where we can all talk to each other about some of the common things that we have on our professional landscape. So that's my dilemma a little bit as an author, and my pathway through that is to identify, again, the things that we have in common, and while also allowing space for teachers to make their individual meaning along the way. So instead of being an author, I'm trying to be more of a cartographer by offering a common map that I think describes the features, the most important features that we all are facing on our professional landscape. And then I'm offering leaving it up to the readers to use that map to facilitate their work with each other. The map is called the Island of Practice, and I have a sketch of it on the next slide. I'm going to show it to you and give you some silent time to digest it. And all this map is, I'm not speaking for you. I'm just trying to provide a model, right? I'm just trying to provide a model that will allow us an allegory to kind of talk with each other about the different things, right? I know that teaching is so different. And one of the challenges is it's so specific to each of us that we need to have some common language. And I'm just trying to use that map to create this common language around what we see on our teaching landscape. So I invite you to pause and take a moment. Take a look at that and the labels. I think this is true for a lot of us. And this is what I'm seeing, what I hear from math teachers around this country and seeing in our classrooms. And I'm wondering if this map resonates with you. And what do you think these features might mean? So I'm really just kind of curious about whether you resonate with these symbols. I'm trying to be very inclusive with the symbols that I'm using here. Symbols are dangerous. I got Lee asking about Vantage. Great, we'll get to that. So I want to talk a little bit about this map is the tool that we use to kind of talk about how do we embody these guiding principles. And so I want to talk briefly a little bit about the tree and the garden. And I think that we all have a teaching tree, and we all have a teaching tree because I think teaching requires a nourished passion. And the tree represents our beliefs, the whys behind our actions, what we believe about education and schooling, what we believe about the teaching and learning of mathematics, what we believe about what it means to what a math classroom should look like. And so I think that we have these deeply passionate beliefs, and we want them, we need nourishment from that. And so I try to use a tree there as a symbol to define that. And the other thing, the garden, and I view the garden as, we all have a garden, and it's unique to ourselves because teaching is a practice. It's an expression of identity. There's no one playbook for a good teaching career, right? There's no good one playbook for an effective math lesson. And you can give the same math lesson to two different teachers, and you'll get two different learning experiences. How we bring mathematics to life in the classroom, I think, is very personal to us and very individualized. And so I use the garden to talk about our teaching. It's the hows. Okay? So using this language, flourishment is about making sure our passions are renewed, that we're feeling effective about the work that we're doing, we're having a positive impact, that all this effort, all this energy, all the illness and waking up sick, all the tired, getting sick on the day before vacation, all that stuff that we deal with as teachers, right? That it's worth it. Like, that's what our tree feels. And that we're also getting better year in and year out. If you're teaching for 10, 15, 30 years, you want to feel like you're getting better at this craft. And so I thinking about the tree in the garden, this idea of flourishment, I'm echoing some language here by Parker Palmer, that it can be a challenge for us to separate our personal failures from our professional failures. But we need to learn to practice doing that, right? We need to recognize that our professional failures are not personal to us. And so I love this quote by Parker Palmer, and I often begin, I love sharing this quote with a room full of teachers, and I suggest that you do it. I invite you to do it as well if you would like. And it's a great way to get teachers to begin talking vulnerably a little bit about their work. So I think that Parker Palmer is speaking to this idea of the sea of shame that we might be facing that surrounds our island of practice. You may also notice some other features there. On the left, the immovable mountains to me represent that our teaching practice doesn't exist in a vacuum. The realities of budgeting and class size and politics, district politics, standardized tests, all the different learning needs of our students, those are never going to go away. We're always going to have a curriculum that has a gap between what our students are ready for and what the curriculum offers. And we got student attitudes around mathematics. Those are always going to be there. Those are always going to be things that we need to continually address. The fog of better there is to remind us that we need clarity about what our math teaching goals are and getting clear about what good productive math classrooms should look, sound, and feel like. And the dump represents the dilemmas that I think that we have, that we've yet to resolve in our teaching. And it's the unproductive area that borders our garden. And it's really the source of frustration. It kind of represents what isn't going well in our teaching, but we've given up trying and we've learned to deal with it, right? Like, those are the things that kind of end up in the dump. So this, and again, I think every teacher of mathematics that I have met faces some version of their own version of these symbols on their professional landscape. And I think it's something that we have in common. And with this common language, we can talk about and take the risks and talk vulnerably with each other, and engage in the relationships that are going to help us go below the surface, and engage in the rich kind of thinking that we need to, and instead of just engaging in shallow talk. So to help us with this journey, to help us go deep, you'll notice on the map there were 3 icons: the lighthouse and the campfire and a boat. These are structures that are in the book, and I'm going to offer them to them. I'm going to ask for your email address, and if you give it to me, I'll send you the protocols. I'll send you the activities. This is just a snapshot of what they are. But in the book is every chapter has a lighthouse reflection where you're thinking. Lighthouse moments are about achieving the focus that we need. It's about how we get clear about our beliefs and how we deepen our own learning. And it's where we're critical about what's not working for our tree in our garden. And it's also where we try to pierce through this fog of better. And campfire gatherings are when we engage in this relationship building. So campfire gatherings are small group conversations. The teachers in the group, 3 teachers, 4 teachers, 5 teachers, not 100. Right? Just the small group of teachers that are working closely together. And it's how they learn to navigate the sea of shame. And it's when we celebrate otherness and we seek to build each other up. And I think, lastly, this piece, Seek Vantage, this is the piece of the journey that helps us shift our perspective. It helps us see with new eyes our own problems of practice. And I hope you see that those 3 things connect with the 3 steps of deliberate practice. We need to have focus, we need to have vantage to shift our perspective, and we need to have a culture where we feel comfortable taking risks. And so I'm attaching a little bit of that language, that deliberate practice, to these structures. Some of you asked a little bit about, what do I mean by the word vantage? And so I mean it quite literally. It's a strategic viewpoint. It's a perspective that offers you some advantage. And so when we are teaching mathematics in our lessons are oftentimes our only perspective, right, on our practice, and the effectiveness of our practice is from the position as a teacher teaching, from the front of the room, usually for most of us, but certainly not all. And from this perspective, we are processing an unbelievable amount of data, right, as we navigate the learning for our students. And under this cognitive load, it's really hard to hear and perceive everything at the pace of learning. But when we shift out of this role, when we take on a different vantage on the teaching of learning of mathematics by going into another classroom, we are freed from the cognitive load of teaching, and we can see things in new eyes. Max Rick gave a great Ignite talk. When 2 is greater than 4, I think it's what it's called. You should check it out. Great Ignite talk about how teachers, we sometimes get caught in listening for the right answers from our students instead of listening to what students have to say. And he encourages us to sit in other lessons because it gives us this vantage point to better hear not only the questions we're asking, right, but also how we interpret, how we respond to what students are saying. And so when we watch other teachers in this way, just as one example, but in many different ways, when we watch other teachers and students engage in the practice of teaching and learning, we are automatically going to be thinking differently about our own practices in ways that we couldn't before. And I recognize that time is a finite resource. I know. I'm hoping that you can find 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes a week to find coverage. If you're an elementary school teacher, it requires some creative scheduling. But again, change isn't going to happen unless the frustration, right, makes it worth it. And I recognize that time is a finite resource. And I have some more ideas about how I've seen schools be able to set up this cycles of deliberate practice for teachers. And so with this idea of vantage in mind, our journey to professional development is about having new eyes on our current landscape. And so I recognize that you have limited bandwidth. I'm going to offer you just a few activities, just an outline of them. If you want to get the whole thing, I'm happy to share them with you. But the first step of our journey to professional flourishment is we got to engage in this relationship building. And maybe you have amazing, authentic, deep, vulnerable relationships with your colleagues. A lot of us don't. And so I want to offer some opportunity to build on that. And so, because if we don't have those productive relationships, what ends up happening is that we're going to stay on the surface of the lake and we're not going to go deep. And so our depth is going to be defined by the quality of our relationships. And again, this is how we go deep. It's through this cycle. And you'll see this cycle So the first thing that I ask teachers to do is silently reflect and think about this question. What is your teaching story? And I ask them to individually write and think. And there's a bunch of sub-questions. When did you decide you wanted to be a teacher? What appealed to you about it? Did you change jobs in your career? Why did you change jobs? What did you learn from that? And creating some space. And then a really powerful thing happens when we gather, right? And we share the stories that we bring to each other, right? We want to engage in this campfire. And remember, when we're engaging in a campfire conversation, I forgot to mention this, is a campfire of a certain size. We want it warm enough that it creates enough heat that it holds us together. We want to bring enough vulnerability, enough fuel to the fire. But we also don't want that fire to get too big, right? Because then it becomes a bonfire, right? And the heat's too intense and we begin to look away instead of really looking in. And this is the relationship building we need to be building with each other and not this. And so when we share those teaching stories and we engage in mirroring conversations and start reflecting back what we're hearing, we really kind of begin really build this sense of collective otherness and the relationships that need to happen. And I'm also a big fan of the activity of windows and mirrors. We're hearing the teaching stories of others. Like, what is a truth that I see that connects us, right? And what is something that I hear that reveals a greater truth about me? And so I love doing this activities with teachers. It's really powerful. And the next thing I ask them to do is spend some time, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, a lesson if you can, in somebody else's classroom. That's it. Just do that. Pay attention to all the data you can. That's all. What do you feel? What do you see? What do you hear? What are students doing? You don't need to go in with a big agenda. Just go in and be in there. And that'll normalize the process, right? It'll allow the students in the room to realize that you may be there from time to time and normalize that. And at the end of the observation, I'm borrowing these questions from Steve Leinwand. At the end of that observation, I really invite the observer, not the observed, right? Because the observation is for the observer, to use these sentence prompts, right? And for the observed teacher to reflect that back in a mirroring conversation to build those relationships. And then after that experience, we come back to focus, right? And we think more critically, like, what have I learned now that I didn't used to know about my own island of practice? Hang on one second. Excuse me. So that's the first step. I talk about having teachers build relationships by engaging and talking about their teaching story. And so from here, I think that you'll see a pattern, and these are the structures to the overarching part of the book, is going through these cycles of deliberate practice. So the next thing I have teachers do is think about their teaching tree. And I ask them to think about ways that they're passionate about their work and engage in this activity called a passion profile. If you've been in some of my workshops, you've gone through it, and I'm happy to share it. But while we all bring passions to our work, sometimes those passions are nourished by different things. And this is just a quick snapshot, and I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody. And maybe your passion isn't represented on here, and that's great. In the activity, this list used to be 4 things long, and now it's 5 because of the work that some of the other people have given me in for feedback. So I'm not trying to pigeonhole you. You probably bring a diversity of these, right? So I asked teachers to do that 100 pennies activity, spend 100 pennies. How would you distribute them to describe your passions accurately? And there's a description for all of these, and you'll have access to that as well. But then we talk about, and again, engaging in this collaboration about what passions do we bring? And we get together and engage in this relationship building and talk about, then we go out and we start looking like, how do we show our passions to our students, right? What norms do we have? How do we instill the values that we believe in? How does our tree have influence in the classroom, right? And through that lens, we can begin to now reflect a little bit about how our tree influences our own practice in our own classroom. Like, in what ways do I show my students I care? After getting teachers to talk about the tree, I get them talking about the garden. Again, focus, thinking about what your vision is. What is your vision for your ideal math classroom? Establishing a common vision together, and then also asking this really big pivotal question. Who's math class not working for, and why? right? And really letting teachers identify for themselves the students that aren't working and really unpacking what those beliefs might be. Now, again, not looking and thinking about your own students, right? Because that's from the same vantage point right there. When we're engaged in that vantage, we're looking at other students failing or struggling in other classrooms. And what can we learn then about why students aren't working in our own classroom? After that, with that in place, we can get talking about equity and the effective teaching practices that are in the principles to action, continuing this. And I just want to highlight a whole bunch of this real quick by one quick example. I work with a great, amazing group of teachers at a high school here in LA Unified, and they have established cycles of deliberate practice. And they've been really curious about productive struggle. They got a lot of learned helplessness. They're seeing that, right, in the regular vantages into each other's classrooms. And they're also realizing they're rescuing kids. And so they're aware of this, right? And it's something that they're bothered by, but they also don't know how to get out of it, right? And so they did some research on Peter Liljedahl's vertical non-permanent surfaces. It's worth checking out. Check it out. And we explored that, right? And they put that into the lighthouse to get some focus about what does it mean? What does Peter have to say? What do other people have to say about how we do this? And then teachers started sharing. We started sharing our understanding. We got some clarity, and we made some commitments that we are going to embed these ideas into our teaching practice. And they did. And that allowed them not to have to do a common lesson planning. I hear something about lesson study popping up here. I've intentionally avoided that word. If you know me, you know I do that a lot. The problem with lesson study is it requires leaders. It requires principals, coaches, teachers. It is really, really resource intense. And I'm saying that's great if you have those resources. Do lesson study. What I think we need to do is let go of the reality that the top-down model isn't going to work for us and that we need to take advantage for ourselves. Lesson study isn't necessarily teacher-directed. And for it to work, I think it needs to be. So I'm offering ways to rethink what lesson study is about, okay? And so if you're making a connection, yeah, there is a connection, but I think that this is lesson study that doesn't necessarily require the level of resources and intensity that make lesson study not a regular thing for most people. And so I want to have us have these regular practices. And so the teachers at the school, right, lesson study, maybe it happens once a year, twice a year, right? Deliberate practice should be happening regularly. It should be woven in to our practice. And I love it, Bonnie, pushing back on ideas. And please do. Like, we're all going to get better together. And so I'm trying to create this practice with teachers, really developing this practice for themselves. And these teachers go through it regularly. It's just a part of their work and their practice. And so I want to just kind of remind ourselves about these four guiding principles and how they can help us engage in this deliberate practice. Because math class isn't working for some of our students. And I really want to engage in the meaningful shifts so that we can start meeting the needs of all the students in our class. And so I hope you feel empowered. I hope you feel a little bit provoked into some response. I see some disagreement, and that is great. And I hope you see this as an invitation and a beginning to have a conversation. I want us to stay in touch. And hopefully you have some new ideas about what it would take to align the PD that we need for ourselves to grow our teaching craft and maybe the PD that we're being offered and how we can close that for ourselves. I really want to thank you for taking the time tonight. If you click on that bit.ly, it'll take you to a Google survey. The only thing I ask for is your email. The only thing I'm going to send you are resources specific to this. And then I also ask for some feedback questions. If you want to offer those, you can. You don't have to. But if you want some more, you want to be in the loop on these in the coming weeks. And if you're watching this as a recording, know that this link will still be live. And then there is my Twitter handle. Geek out and reach out to me, please. And there is my email. And I want to thank you so much. I know that you I have a lot going on in your life, and you took the time to spend some time with me. And I'm really, truly honored and truly grateful. So thank you so much. And I think we have a little bit of time for some question and answers.
Yes, thank you very much for presenting tonight. I didn't actually see a whole lot of questions in the chat. There was a lot of chatter just of people sharing ideas and commenting on a lot of the topics and a lot of the ideas you were sharing. I just wanted to let people know that in the chat, I did post the hyperlink. I'll post that again. It is clickable in the chat, so you don't even have to copy and paste it. You can just click on it and say open a new tab, and you should be able to get to the feedback and resources for deliberate practice webinar form to fill out. So please make sure you do that so that you can get the resources that Chase has for you.
Can I speak a little bit to the lesson study piece?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm hugely a fan of lesson study. If you go to my website, chaseorm.com, you'll find tons of lessons I've done on lesson study. The work I'm presenting to you now happens because the lesson studies that I've gone to, they haven't been woven into the school culture. And Martha, I'm so glad that when that happens, that is great, right? And that should be the goal. What I'm seeing are teachers that they don't have the opportunity for lesson study, so now what, right? And they can bring Chase in for a little math holiday and we do a lesson study, but I've always been frustrated because it never perseveres and sticks. And that can be feedback for me as a facilitator. But this is what I've learned sticks more, taking the best of what's about lesson study, right? That power of perspective and the building of relationships, right? And I try to get away of the common lesson planning, but we're focusing on a common pedagogic practice or problem of practice, and really doing the observing just more regularly and more informally than what may necessarily be required. I've seen some lesson studies that have 25 adults in the room. That's hugely intense. I've seen lesson studies with 3 adults in the room, so it comes in all different sizes. But I'm really trying to reshift our approach to lesson study quite a bit. So I want to say I'm a huge advocate for them. I love them, and I want to say that yeah, they're useful. I'm just trying to come up at another way around it. If you're a fan of lesson study, this is the book that makes lesson study and provides all that foundation for you. I think it'll make you a lot better. Sometimes you may know that you begin lesson study and teachers are like this a little bit and they're closed off and they're nervous about you're going to have somebody in my classroom. Yeah, right. And like, so how do we normalize that in a low flow way? So thank you, Christy. And again, I hope this begins a conversation and a dialogue. I would love to get better with you. Oh man, I've got this Q&A over here and I haven't even clicked it yet.
I don't know if there's actually anything over there. Let's see.
Yeah. George had a great point. I talk about being teacher-centered, right? Yeah, our teaching needs to be student-centered, right? And our PD should think about our students as well. But I think professional learning is, that needs to be teacher-centered. I don't no blame game, right? But like the system the system expects our classrooms to be student-centered, but they don't give us a PD that is teacher-centered, and that's what I'm arguing for. Our classroom should be student-centered, and our PD program needs to be teacher-centered. It needs to really put us and our lived experience at the center of the learning experience, just like we're asking teachers to do with their math instruction. So, yeah. What else we got?
Let's see. I think Sky just posted something there.
I like what you said at the beginning about not playing.
Discuss this topic with other teachers on a 7th grade team for subjects.
So sign up and I'll share these activities. I don't quite know exactly some of these topics. Yeah. I don't know what you mean by discuss the topics. Do you want to do them with your team? I mean, I can give them to you and we can continue the conversation. If you're on Twitter, send me a DM or send me a email and we'll talk about it. And I think maybe you're talking about the non-math teachers. And I think the opening chapters of this book can relate. I think the island of practice does relate to all teachers. I really think that there's something uniquely cultural about mathematics and math education that impacts our work in a unique way. And the last 60% of the book is specific to principles to action and those things about those challenges to a math classroom.
So Jimmy posted a question. I don't know, Jimmy, are you talking about a specific resource, or you said, where do you recommend we go next? I don't know if you're talking about like a
Yeah,
specific.
I mean, you are welcome. Go ahead.
I was just saying, are there like maybe people on Twitter that somebody might follow, that focuses on this besides yourself, or other resources out there?
Yeah, Deborah Ball has a ton. Catherine Lewis has a ton. You can find a ton on Lesson Study. If you want, so Catherine Lewis, I'm spacing on his first name, Takahashi, is another resource as well. And he's in Chicago, I believe. Forgive me, I'm spacing in that. Catherine Lewis is at Mills College. I don't know where Deborah Ball is. I think Michigan State. They all have great resources. And I've used their idea. Those ideas are embedded in this work too. I'm not trying to dismiss them. Those are great. And Deliberate Practice, those Freakonomic podcasts I find are valuable. But there's a lot of great videos about Eric Anderson's stuff. If you don't want to read the whole book and you just want to gobble up a couple of the videos and see what other people think of him, it may help you kind of understand what's really going on. And Deliberate Practice is this purposeful practice plus the coaching element, the other aspect of perspective. And I think we as teachers, if we don't have coaches, we need to create those opportunities for ourselves, which is why I've kind of changed it. And then Max Ray Rick's Ignite Talk, listening to, or 2 is greater than 4, listening to is greater than listening for. I can't quite remember it, but that might be another good recommendation as well.
There's also a suggestion or a question about what are your 5 favorite Twitter accounts? Do you have some?
I'm terrible with superlatives. I'm gonna let that. I'm gonna let other people answer that question. And about favorite Twitter accounts. Lately, man, it's a lot about humor. So that's what I've been trying to tap into. And I see other people sharing some great things, and that's great. Who is feeding my teaching soul? Y'all are right now. Like, this is the most human connection I've had in 8 weeks. So it's really great to be here with you. So how long can Q&A go for? Lee, I know you want to introduce some
as long as it can go, as long as people continue to have questions. So
how do we settle the abstract nature of maths? Are you talking about, like, as kids get into high school, that math becomes super abstracty? Like Algebra 2, you're talking about the algorithm stuff? Without knowing that, I would say that's a lack of clarity problem, right? That if teachers are grappling with this, which you may be, right, how do you get clear about, what parts of the nature of maths do we value, and how do we communicate that? And so abstract piece is only one side, right? Like, there's the concrete piece and the representational piece, and thinking fluently about this. And so, yeah, I mean, part of me wants to say that deliberate practice can be, because kids are different. Some kids are ready for formal algorithms and layers of their abstraction, whereas some kids are looking at establishing their algorithm from a conceptual, visual kind of perspective as well. I don't know if that really answers your question, but what about if you have a coach who's just a coach on paper who regurgitates things that are told to them? Yeah, right, top down, right? So that I have empathy for that coach. They're stuck in the top down mandate. I will tell you, I am self-employed. I have contracts with LA Unified. I am not an LA Unified employee. And part of that reason is I don't want to be caught up in the top-down mandates. I want to have the freedom and the autonomy to be able to do this work with the teachers that I work with, right? So I empathize with that coach, and I'm hoping that coach could be like, hey, read this. Hey, I heard about this book that's coming out, and I'll give you some resources here, like the introduction, so you can share with your coach. And maybe they're like, maybe we want to try this, and maybe that coach can be nudged to, run your PLC meetings using these activities. I don't know. How much history of math do I don't do a whole lot of history. I include it when it pops up, when it's pertinent. It's a great way to begin storytelling in my lessons. Generate many ideas for integrated history of math. Well, I would love to hear that. I would love to hear, George, how that happens, and certainly the power of stories. I think it's a really important topic. And again, what would happen is like, let's say I want to bring in history of stories. So I met George Littman, and he told me these great ideas about the history of math, and I want to implement them, right? And I can go into my classroom and practice by myself, and maybe my kids are like, man, nah, this ain't working. But how do I stick with it? And what do I do if I get discouraged? And I'm more likely if I have some colleagues, right, and I'm open with them about like, I really want to try this, and do you want to try it with you and with me? And you don't have to, but I want to try it, and I would love to have some feedback from you by being in the room about what's working and what's not working. I will echo Sky's Fawn Win Twitter handle. She's really irreverent, meaning she tells it how it is. And she's got a keen mind and just really brilliant. And as irreverent as she is, as her willingness to be direct and call out elephants, she is such a good human, and embracing other people's struggles and speaking very humbly. Which PD presenters do we need to check out?
I think.
So Jamie, I would check out Steve Leinwans from last November. He speaks a lot about how bad PD is. If you want you think that I might be rubbing people the wrong way, like Steve is really good at asking those irreverent questions, and he's really on point, and I love his work. Thank you, Lee.
Yep. Yeah, I posted the link to Steve's presentation. So his
Sarah Vanderwerf is also great. Has a bunch of resources as well. Recommend following her.
Yeah. The other thing I will say is, if you get into following people on Twitter, like if you follow who they follow, I mean, they're following good people as well. So it just kind of propagates that way.
And if you're new to Twitter, you're like just signing up, send me a message, send me an email. I'll figure out, like, we'll get you going with your first tweet. I'll retweet it. We'll get you going in a good place.
Yeah.
So
definitely good to be involved in Twitter. I'm starting a book group, with some people just that I have met through Twitter. So for the summer, it is Tracy Zager's book, Becoming the Math Teacher You Wish You'd Had. So yeah, lots of people out there that want to connect and learn from each other. So yeah, I'm forming a book group with people that I've never met before. And I'm looking forward to it, and it'll be fun.
Great.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me conclude tonight by saying thank you again. And in terms of certificates, those of you that want certificates for attendance, you actually need to email globalmathdepartment@gmail.com. Information about what you need to include with your email will be given in the email you'll get that goes with this recording. So if you wait about 24 hours, you'll get an email with the link to this recording, and it also tells you how you can get your PD certificate. Those are not generated automatically because we do have people that sign up that don't end up attending. So we have to actually cross-check it against the attendance list. Yeah, definitely Dan Meyer is good to also follow on Twitter. All right, so thanks again. Yeah.
I got some quick questions about attendance and a certificate of attendance that some people have asked.
Yeah, so you will get a certificate of attendance if you send an email to globalmathdepartment@gmail.com. They will get instructions about that when they get the email with the link to the video. So yeah, those are not automatically generated because we have to verify that people actually showed up. We have usually, about 10 to 15% of the people that sign up show up. So we have a lot more people that don't show up than do show up. So you actually do have to send that email, and then that gets transcribed by our PD transcriber, Francesca. All right. So thank you very much for presenting tonight, Chase. Next week, on tap, attending to equity in mathematics during a pandemic, supporting inclusion, access, fairness, and respect for all. And we have 2 presenters next week, Ruth May Sears and Carrie Pender. So I hope that you will come back for that one, because we definitely, have felt a need to deal with equity during this pandemic and teaching during this time. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening or morning or afternoon.
Thank you all. Stay in touch. Bye.